Welcome to today's RUC People, and I'm delighted to be joined by Carolyn Rodger, who's been part of our church here at RUC for quite some time now. Welcome, Carolyn. Thanks for joining us. Carolyn, I imagine you're now primarily retired, but maybe that's wrong. Please tell us a little bit more about what you're doing for yourself these days.
Yes, but I've always got to have some form of teaching in my life. So I'm involved with literacy teaching at Claremont Primary School at the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about that.
It's a legacy of the Shine program, which has closed up now. And we take grade 2s who are struggling to keep up and give them one-on-one lesson once a week as a rule. And some of them make remarkable progress and graduate from the program, and others need a little bit longer.
Can you tell us a bit more about the school? What kind of children attend?
Claremont Primary is a mostly coloured school. And we were intrigued to find out that long ago one of our friends went there in the 1950s. But it's a well-equipped school and very nicely kept. So I just pop along there once a week or so.
Right. And how did you get involved there?
Well, I had been involved with WordWorks, which is a similar thing at Constantia Primary, and then COVID killed that. And I happened to be chatting to Ross one day and found out he was involved with this literacy program as well as his maths program, and asked if if they needed somebody, and I started then.
Okay. So you've been a teacher for most of your life? All your life. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you get into teaching and what kind of teaching were you doing?
Well, I didn't really know what I wanted to do till about Standard 9.
Right.
And then the sister of a friend of mine was doing her student teaching. And we used to get regular reports about what she was doing. And gradually the idea took hold that I would also like to teach. So then I did a BA majoring in Latin and English at UCT.
Latin, my goodness.
But if your brain is suited to Latin, it's no problem. And did my teacher's diploma there. And then, by then, Alistair and I were engaged, and we both got posts in Port Elizabeth. And in my first year of teaching, I was teaching Latin from grade 8 to grade 12, and English for grade 12 and grade 9 or 10. I had one free period a week, and that was really heavy going. And there was no one on the staff who the three of us who taught English higher or home language could turn to for advice. And so we were a bit worried, but it didn't occur to us that the parents might be worried. But it all went all right.
And you taught languages your whole life?
Yes, generally. A wee bit of social studies thrown in at one stage.
Right. Interesting. So Carolyn, take us back a bit further. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And tell us a bit about your family.
Right. Well, I was born at the Kingsbury down the road there.
Okay.
And grew up in Rosebank and Mowbray. Went to Rustenburg Girls' School from grade 1 to grade 12.
Yes.
I was very happy at school, although some people thought it was too rigid. And then...
Your family?
My family, well, I have a slightly younger brother, so we went through school in the same standard, so it was almost like having a twin. And he's still around in Tokai, also retired accountant. And we had a very loving extended family who spoilt us rotten with things like fireworks for Guy Fawkes Day. And but home was difficult because my father became an alcoholic.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of tension and stress at home. But we never talked to it about people at school. And it was only much later I found out other friends of mine had similar problems at home.
Right.
Yeah.
And your parents, what kind of work did they do?
My mum was a qualified social worker, but she didn't work. My dad had been in the RAF. He flew the great big Sunderland flying boats. And then towards the end of the war, he taught people to fly. And at the end of the war, he went on flying charter flights and so on, until finally he became a sales rep. And he spent most of his time with Lion Beer and then the Stellenbosch Farmers Winery.
Right.
Yeah.
But drank a bit too much of the local product.
Yes, it was so easily available, so cheap for him.
Yes.
And also he suffered, I'm sure, from post-traumatic stress from the war days. And there was no counselling at all for anybody. And the other thing was you were regarded as a bit of a sissy if you needed psychiatric help. And he also lost his brother, who was killed in an unexplained flying accident during the war. And his brother was 10 years older than he was. And a bit of a father figure because my father's own father had died when he was only 6. So I think that, and he suffered from depression, which he wouldn't have treated, of course. So I think all those things combined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did they make it difficult for you as a family growing up?
It was tense, yeah. You never quite knew how things would go after he came home.
And so you said schooling was happy, though,
Oh,
and
yes.
you decided to be a teacher. Do you know what was behind that?
Well, as I say, this hearing about teaching from my friend about what her sister was doing and so on.
Yeah.
And when I was a Girl Guide, I was a patrol leader. And I think that perhaps influenced it as well because I enjoy passing things on to other people. So that was possibly also part of it.
Right. And Carolyn, did you grow up in a Christian or a church household? Was that part of your upbringing at all?
Not at all. Although both my grandmothers, one in Kimberley, one here, were churchgoers. But when we were I must tell you first then, when we got to high school, I went to various meetings of the different societies. So I went to the Scripture Union meeting. And because people knew me, they elected me the Standard 6 representative. And because I had a bit of a sense of duty, I went to the meetings. And then my friends started getting confirmed. And I thought maybe I should do that too. And I was confirmed in my Grand's Church, St. Paul's, up the road here. But I still hadn't made a proper commitment until I went to a camp for, by then I think I was secretary of the Scripture Union. And at this particular leadership camp, Bishop Bruce Evans from Christchurch in Kenilworth was a speaker. And he talked about the resurrection in ways that made sense to me, and we just got on to thinking about things like atoms in science at school. And so that was when I first made a commitment.
Though you're already the secretary of the Scripture Union,
Yes.
which sounds like a bit of a commitment to me.
Yeah, well, that's a different kind of commitment. Yeah, and another encouraging thing was that the Carol Bam, who was head prefect, 3 years ahead of my year, was a regular at Scripture Union, and she set an example. She later married Michael Cassidy, the head of Africa Enterprise, and they're still living in Pietermaritzburg today.
Okay. And so when did Alistair come on the scene, and how did that come about?
Oh, well, that was through the university.
Okay.
a friend of mine from first year invited me to a student YMCA camp at Betty's Bay. And that was where I first met Alistair. And he was 2 years ahead of me at university, also doing Latin. And so we gradually got to know each other during that first year after we met and started going out. And then he went off to Kimberley to teach at Kimberley Boys High for a year. And we kept in touch. Well, he came down a few times during the year, but we kept in touch via the post. In those days, he could post a letter on Sunday. It would get to me on Wednesday. I could write my reply at university on Thursday and post it there, and he'd get it on Saturday. So we kept in touch and started going out after the middle of the year. And then he had already decided that he would follow his father's footsteps and become a Presbyterian minister. So I knew pretty well from the outset that if I married him, I would be marrying into the Presbyterian Church. And so after his year in Kimberley, he came back to Cape Town, did some extra subjects towards doing a BD at Rhodes. And then we both got posts in Port Elizabeth. He was at Grey High School teaching Latin and English. And I was at Pearson High School teaching Latin and English. And then after 3 years there, when he'd worked off his obligation to the province for teaching bursary, we went to Grahamstown. And I taught at Victoria Girls High and Kingswood College. And Alistair did his BD over 4 years in the end,
At Rhodes?
At Rhodes.
Yes.
And that was where we first came across Helen Shaw, then Donaldson, and her family, because Bob Donaldson was the minister at the church there.
Wonderful. How did you enjoy Grahamstown?
Very much. It was. It's in a poor state now. But then the old part of Grahamstown was very attractive still. VG was a very good school with a wonderful headmistress called Kitty Richardson, an absolute legend in the teaching profession. I enjoyed my 2 years at VG. Then we decided we were going to start a family, so I resigned and nothing happened. And I got a distress call from Kingswood College who needed a Latin teacher, part-time. And I was also very happy at Kingswood. It had just gone co-ed at that time, and some of my VG pupils moved across to Kingswood at that time, including Carol Craig. And I taught her a couple of years at VG and the rest of the time at Kingswood. And then I did a little bit of tutoring for Rhodes in method of religious education and some Latin tutoring. And I also got involved with the Rhodes Reading Centre. And this was in the 1970s when there were big developments in the teaching of children with reading difficulties. And Rhodes was a pioneer in this. So and I found that very interesting, and I've continued with that sort of thing at intervals ever since.
And as someone who's been a teacher all of your life, I mean, did you find the way you're teaching and what you were teaching evolved? I mean, were you teaching, similar things? But my understanding is not many people learn Latin these days. I'm not sure when that all fell away. I actually did Latin myself, so I do identify that's a long time ago. But did you continue to teach English or other subjects as well?
Yes. I taught at many different schools, because from Rhodes we went up to Gauteng, where Alistair had to do post-academic training. Turned out to be more like 27 years in Gauteng.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I
In Johannesburg?
Yeah, we lived in Randburg, and I taught it. Overall, I think I've taught at least 14 or 15 schools.
Wow.
I did quite a bit of relief teaching in the days when teachers got long leave. And I taught at a nest school, which was in the same family as Zonneblum here. It was the New Era Schools Trust, which promoted multiracial schooling from about 1989. And I was at the 1 year Kyle Army in Joburg for 6 or so years, I think. The headmaster there was a most interesting guy. I mean, he even went off to the Leeuwkop prison and taught them line dancing, I think it was. So I was very happy there. And then Alistair had at that stage been the General Secretary of the Presbyterian Church. And his time there came to an end. And then we moved back to Port Elizabeth. And again, I did some part-time teaching in Port Elizabeth until we finally retired back to Cape Town. So we were away from Cape Town, living in Cape Town for 40 years altogether.
And would I be right in guessing that your teaching posts had to sort of coincide with Alistair's, placements within the Presbyterian Church? So he'd be moved to a different church. You'd have to find a job somewhere nearby. Is that how it kind of worked?
Yeah, more or less, yeah. And of course we had 2 sons.
Yes, I was going to ask when the children came along.
I had a long break from formal teaching, about 15 years, I think. But I was always involved in something like adult basic education or Sunday school or Cubs or something like that, centre of concern. And so James was born in 1979 and Douglas 2 years later. We had a bit of a battle to get James coming along, and then Douglas just came to order after that. So he was, and so I think I was privileged actually to be at home with them most of the time.
Yes. Did you take a longer break from your
Well,
teaching?
that was why the break was so long.
Yes.
And because I knew how demanding teaching was. And trying to combine that with a family, I didn't see, until they were fairly independent.
Yes.
And when I went back, I was doing mostly relief work, so it was sort of on again, off again, and generally no extramural activities.
Sure. And as a minister's wife, did you have a sort of a formal role, or did you define yourself as that, or I'm a teacher, I happen to be married to Alistair, who's a Presbyterian minister, or did you find yourself actively involved in the church, supporting him as well?
Yes and no. I actually had for a minister's wife at that time, mine was a bit of a strange life. His first appointment was to St. Luke's in Vereeniging as an assistant minister. And there was already a very efficient minister's wife there.
Yes.
And then we moved to Nigel, which is a small town on the East Rand. And the boys were born while we were there. But I was once very rude to somebody who assumed that I would do something because I was the minister's wife. And I was sorry about that afterwards. So, yes, I taught in Sunday school. A friend of mine looked after the boys while I was teaching Sunday school and so on. And I was involved in the Centre of Concern teaching adult literacy. We actually, a friend and I founded the Centre of Concern in Nigel. And then Alistair went to St. John's Park Moor, which is an ecumenical church. And there, so he was one of a team, and again there were other ministers' wives. And then from there, he was asked to be General Secretary of the church, much to his surprise. And St. John's somehow had a primarily Anglican orientation, although the services were alternated, Methodist, Anglican, Presbyterian, and so on, took turns. And I was just getting used to this when he went into the church office, and we moved to Randburg, and then we decided to join St. Mungo's Church, which was up the road in Bryanston. And, so my teaching career was very much influenced by where we were, according to his job, yes.
And I was going to ask, as a family, was that difficult also, having to constantly resettle children into schools, and, you make friends and then move somewhere else and then move somewhere else? Was that difficult, or was it, actually a positive, lots of new experiences and adventures? And
they were lucky.
Yes.
Because although we moved twice in Parkmore. We had 1 year and then 2 or 3 years in another house in Parkmore, and then we moved to Randburg. And James once said, "When are we going to move again?" But they were lucky because we stayed in that house for about 17 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
And so they weren't moved, although they did move schools. But so first they'd been at Montrose in Parkmore, and then they moved to I.R. Griffiths Primary School in Randburg, and they saw out their primary school years there, and then went to Greenside High, and then to Wits University. So they weren't actually shifted that much. And they weren't the minister's children either. They might have been spoiled rotten if we'd stayed in a congregation, but they were more like ordinary schoolboys, No, and they didn't actually join the school Christian associations either.
And did you enjoy being a mum?
Yes, especially seeing we battled to have the kids in there initially.
Yes.
Sort of, what if we don't have our own children? Would we adopt, and so on? So it was a great joy when we produced our two.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in hospital after James was born, feeling and holding him in my arms. And the nurse walked past and said, "Badaff, you're spoiling him." And I said, "No, I'm just bonding." And I always felt that having the boys in the Far East Strand Hospital was a bit like going to the army, because there was a wide range of people in the ward at the hospital. And,
Okay. And so after all of that, a move back to Cape Town, was that an easy decision? Because obviously, Joburg had been home for a long time, many stints in the Eastern Cape as well. What brought you back here?
Well, we didn't ever consider retiring in Johannesburg. We missed the people, but not the place. We were very happy in Port Elizabeth. It was our second stint. Well, I haven't explained, when he left the office, he then had 2 jobs, one in a small church, St. Andrews in Port Elizabeth, and then he was secretary of the Church Unity Commission as well. And we were very happy in Port Elizabeth. We lived in a very nice complex, made friends, and so we did consider retiring in Port Elizabeth. Though I'm glad we didn't now. And but after my mom died, we'd bought a flat down here in Wynberg, either as an investment or to retire to. And finally we decided we had family down here as well, and so we came down here, and very happy ever since. But it was a big adjustment, nevertheless.
I'm sure, yeah. And what connected you with RUC in particular?
Well, when we came down on holiday to visit my parents, we often used to come here, and that was in the days of Douglas Bucks. And Alistair, of course, knew through the church and so on. And so we knew the church quite well. And when we came down, we did a little bit of prospecting. And one of the things in favour of Rondebosch was the music. And we also just felt at home here. And so, yeah, we've been here ever since. That's about 12 years ago.
Yes, yes. And Carolyn, outside of teaching, mothering, what does fun look like? Do you have hobbies, other interests? You know, what sort of makes you smile, sets you alive when you're not, busy?
Well, flowers. I like gardening. I love watching plants grow.
You have your own garden in mind?
We have our own very small garden, but it's amazing what you can get into it and how much I managed to bring to the last plant share and swap. I like succulents and, they don't take up too much space.
Was that something nurtured as a child? Did you have a great garden growing up, and where did that interest?
Yeah, I had my own little patch at home, which I grew things like radishes. And my grandmothers both liked gardening. My mom did quite a bit of gardening. So, yes, I think so. And I've always loved reading. So, never. And then.
What kind of thing did you like to read?
Well, I read more non-fiction than fiction, although I do like a good novel from time to time. A lot of historical stuff. And that's another big interest. We belong to various historical societies in various places. Gardening, reading, birds, that's another thing. When we made our trips down to Cape Town from various places, we always used to see birds along the roads. I used to borrow a beautiful bird book by Ken Newman from the Port Elizabeth Library. And then it grew from there. Somebody gave me an old Roberts, and then finally I bought my own Roberts and so on.
Wonderful. And what does everyday life look like now in retirement? What keeps you busy these days?
Well, it's pretty relaxed, really. We tend to go to bed late and get up late, partly because of TV. And got to read the newspaper every day. I've been a trustee at Wellington News twice now, and that keeps you fairly busy. There's always something to sort out with the other trustees, obviously. No.
You don't have to be busy. That's what retirement, you're supposed to relax and take it easy as well. Just as to what life looks like now. And any plans on the horizon? What's coming up for you?
Well, we've got to make a decision about the next step into a retirement home. And when we came down, we did contact CPOA and go and look at a few places. And then it kind of fell by the wayside. And now our sons are pushing us to get on with it and make a definite plan before we get too old. But that has generally fallen away. There used to be a limit, and most places are more keen on your state of physical fitness than your age.
Are you both in good health?
Yes.
I know Alistair's a runner and has had some injuries, but
used to run, but then he had a big back up.
Yes.
And so now he makes sure he walks every day.
Yes.
And I should walk, but I don't very much.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been really interesting to get to know you. I think probably my last question is, what's over your life, what's been perhaps, some of the most difficult things you've had to deal with, and how did you manage to overcome them?
Uncertainty about the next step. Before we left Joburg, Alistair was even contemplating applying for a post in England as secretary of the what was it? One of the worldwide ecumenical things. And now we knew his job was coming to an end at the church office. That meant again I would have to move and leave my job. And I was very happy. And I found that very trying. And eventually I had a big bout of depression in Joburg. And finally came out of that. Then we went to PE. I was fine there. Then we moved down to Cape Town. And, that was not such a big adjustment. But I experienced a profound sense of loss when we got here. There was some very small things and some bigger things. For instance, loss of my job. I had the sole use of our motor car, so I didn't have that. Loss of my colleagues. And then I had another bout of depression. And so I think that was it takes a long time for me to get out of it. It's I think it's never been really diagnosed except as treatment resistant. And when I am depressed, I don't want to know about anything or anybody. I just don't care.
And is it typically triggered by events or circumstances, or is it more chemical, would you say, or both?
Probably a bit of both. But certainly when I look back, those two big moves I mentioned, I think were triggers. And I had another bout which wasn't, as far as I know, triggered by anything like that. So, but luckily I'm now on medication that works very well. And I see no reason to get depressed again. And I'm planning for our next move to make sure it's as stress-free as possible. For instance, if we have books like you won't imagine.
I can imagine.
And getting rid of them is a problem, especially with Alistair and his books. And so I thought, well, what we could do is put stuff into storage and deal with it gradually, rather than pushing ourselves too hard.
No, if you're packing up your life after many years and downsizing into a new place, that's quite a thing.
We have downsized before. I mean, from Joburg to Port Elizabeth the last time, we downsized quite a bit. But we still probably, because we have a fair-sized flat. And ideally I'd like a retirement place with 2 bedrooms.
Yes.
And a fair amount of space.
And just as you reflect on the years, and the role your faith has played, you weren't born into a church. You came to that a little bit later, married to a Presbyterian minister, but I imagine you've had your own faith journey that's sustained you as well. I don't know if you'd like to say anything about that.
Well, when I'm depressed, it doesn't really seem to matter. I feel totally out of touch with God and with Jesus. So it's difficult to say how that worked. But fortunately, as I've come out of the depression, I've recovered my faith, as it were.
No, I'm sure that's many things are thrown into doubt and uncertainty when you're feeling down and you can't see light.
Everything's going to go wrong.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for sharing so honestly, Carolyn, and giving us a sense of your life journey. And we appreciate the role you play here. And I'm sure your pupils at Claremont School are also happy to see you. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much.